Thank you all for coming back. In the interest of being an on-time airline, we want to sort of start on time, but it's a lovely day out there, so there's a lot of people still drinking some water and having some lovely, I was going to say appetizers, but I guess treats. So thank you for having me back. I'm going to shift gear this time and talk a little bit more about our actual sustainability programs, how we got here, and why we think that it's important to measure some of these sustainability goals. Since this is an energy conference, I am going to focus more on our environmental sustainability goals, but I will mention some of our social and economic goals as well. So why do we care? So we are based off the west coast of the United States, and I mentioned earlier over 20% of our flying is to the Hawaiian Islands, and ostensibly we fly to some of the most beautiful places on Earth, and we think we have a responsibility to those places and to the people that live in those places to protect the environment to the extent that we can. So that was one of our early big drivers for looking at sustainability in the first place. And our journey really started, as it does with many companies, in a grassroots effort through a green team, a group of employees who really thought that we needed to move beyond environmental compliance and start looking at bigger picture environmental impacts. And through just kind of pushing on our upper management, we were able to, in 2009, produce our environmental report called Improving Our Environmental Footprint, where we looked at, it was a report out on what are we doing right now. We did have a green initiative that had a couple goals out there. We were working with FAA and the Port of Seattle and Boeing on improving our landing profiles around the Seattle airport, and we reported a little bit out on those issues, but we really didn't have a comprehensive, structured program. And just through continued efforts, we've gotten to where we are today, where we have a fairly fully integrated sustainability program, and I'm going to talk about what that is. But we have, through 2009, produced now 4 sustainability reports. Our next one will be coming out in May of this year. Just to talk a little bit about the process of how we got there. So this roadmap is pretty typical of a lot of companies and what they do to get to sustainability. I think it's pretty unusual for most CEOs or executive teams to wake up one day and say, you know what we were missing? We need sustainability in our company, right? So they have some other business drivers that they're looking at pretty closely. But just with impacts in society, different rules and regulations, being a more global world, sustainability really is starting to impact businesses. We see things like Nike and other apparel manufacturers being taken to task over child labor practices. We had, going way back, some of you remember the Bhopal, India incident where we had many deaths from chemical releases. People started recognizing we need to do something to protect the people and the environment. So, our roadmap, not dissimilar, is that we really, as I said, started with a group of employees who really thought we needed to have a green team. And I'm happy to say that one of those co-founders of our green team now actually has the official title of Sustainability Manager. Her name is Jacqueline Drumheller, and she doesn't like to take no for an answer. She's very passionate about these issues and just really kept moving the needle and engaging our senior leadership until they really realized that, hey, there is corporate value to having a program, and just like anything else in a business, what gets measured gets managed. And when we set out to actually have some performance goals around sustainability, we actually started people working on those things. So just forming a voluntary team, getting the upline management. Once we assigned a sustainability manager, we actually developed a corporate sustainability steering committee, where that is led by executive team, and then we have an environmental working group, a social working group, and a performance working group that looks in the financial side. integrated this corporate-wide. We do have a policy statement. And where we really are right now is at the metrics and targets. I got asked earlier today, it's like, I really want to understand what you're doing to fully integrate this into your business. We're still right there at the metrics and targets and moving toward the continuous improvement. But it has been a long journey. Like I said, we started this in 2009. It's already 2017, but we have grown by leaps and bounds. So what I was asked to do is really to talk about, why do you track this and how do you track it and what did you decide was relevant to track? So we actually report under what's called the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI. There's several different recognized measurements out there for sustainability metrics, and we chose GRI from the very beginning. So we have seen that through a couple iterations, but it gives us a way to look at what are the societal, economic, and environmental issues that are significant to aviation. If you look at GRI, they've got, I think, 10 categories and 30 different topics under environmental. There's multiple societal, where they're looking at human trafficking, wages, corruption type of things, economic performance. And we look at governance as well, looking at different regulatory and legal issues, looking at peer-based norms, not only of what are other airlines doing, but or what are other industry sectors doing that we compete with or that we work with. And then what are our stakeholders? What are you, the flying public, or are you, the communities in which we serve? What are the issues that are important to you? So we went through and did what's actually called a materiality assessment, and we looked at all of these different factors and decided, what is most important to Alaska Airlines. So some of these factors, I'm going to step away and just use the pointer, but not to go too far from the mic. What you can see is climate change, material use, so what are the products that go into making what you use, ecosystem, biodiversity, energy. I'm not going to read all of these off here. So we looked at this very large pool of environmental impacts and then came up with what are the most important to Alaska, what are business risks, what are business opportunities, and we narrowed that list. I guess I have some pictures here. What are our impacts? CO2, which actually is under that header, as I mentioned earlier, with our interest in reducing emissions. 99.4% of our emissions are from our aircraft, so that is where we are really driving our goals. I'll talk about more of that in a minute. Our ground fleet has emissions. Just our utility use from our buildings. We do not control most of our buildings in the airports. The airports control the utility use, but we do have buildings in Seattle, Anchorage, and Portland where we are looking at minimizing the electrical and looking at other energy sources. How many of you have flown to the mainland in the last year? Almost everybody, all right? How many food or beverage services happened on that flight? 2, 3? So you think about of the, let's just say 150 people that are on board, the number of fuel services times, 600 flights a day. You think about the amount of trash that actually comes out of air transportation. It's enormous. So that's one of the factors that we really thought was important for Alaska to focus on. De-icing fluid, you don't see a lot of that here in Hawaii, but that picture where the guy's up in the bucket spraying the tail, we have to de-ice our aircraft, so we use a significant amount of de-icing fluid, which we have stormwater controls. And then what is emerging as another very big issue is noise around airports. Although the industry has made great strides in improving noise, aircraft are much less noisy than they were in the 70s when jet aircraft first started. If you live around an airport, it's noisy, and this is becoming a really big issue globally again. So we try to work with our communities to mitigate noise. So our environmental commitments is to reduce emissions on the air and on the ground, Reduce consumption of non-sustainable resources, so looking at paper consumption. We did have our CEO one time was like, let's just set a quota. We'll just buy a certain amount of paper, and if it's gone, it's gone. It's like, well, we actually have to have weather packets and flight information that, our regulatory needs for paper. We're getting away from that, but we are trying to reduce that tremendously. Eliminating waste to landfill. I think by far we have the best in-flight recycling program in the country and possibly in the world. It took a very long time to get our flight attendants on board. One, convincing them it really wasn't a lot more work for them, but also that we were actually going to recycle those products that they took the effort to segregate in flight. And then reducing our building energy consumption. I know this is a little bit hard to read, but through all of this, through the materiality assessment, we actually came up with 20 different 2020 goals that were focused around the 4 that we just mentioned, and then looking at increasing, increasing diversity within our workforce, making flying easier for the public, just bringing in some of those social sustainability goals as well. But as I said, I'm going to really focus more on the environmental for this topic. And I'm happy if anybody wants to talk about some of those social impacts are after the session. I'm happy to. Youth and education are kind of our big goals right now moving forward, supporting a lot of STEM education within communities and community outreach. So I did show this slide earlier, reducing aircraft emissions in the air and on the ground are key for us. Right now, with our new merger with Virgin, we will be using about 800 million gallons of fuel a year. If we put that in perspective, with our merger, we will be 6% of the domestic aircraft seats, so we're still a very small player. Aviation does contribute a lot of emissions. So we want to be able to reduce emissions by 20% over, we just changed this metric a little bit to the 2012 baseline. It's going to save us money, and it will produce fewer CO2 emissions. I talked earlier today about that carbon offsetting for international aviation. This is just sort of a notational slide that the International Air Transportation Association put together, looking at if aviation doesn't do anything to try to reduce emissions, that top red line is where we expect the emission growth to be. That first wedge, the green wedge, is if we do improve technologies on the aircraft, that we would be able to reduce emissions somewhat. If we improve operational efficiencies on the ground, single-engine taxi, lowering weights of aircraft, our new Recaro seats that we have are much lighter. We have some improvements. We can go through that green wedge, but where sustainable aviation fuels come in is that blue wedge where we can really drive down emissions. And what that red arrow in the middle points to is this whole carbon offsetting for international aviations that all of us airlines are going to be obligated to pay for beginning in 2021. So we do have some financial drivers as well as just environmental sustainability drivers in making this happen. So a lot of conversation today about electricity and batteries and whatnot. I mentioned earlier that we'll probably have liquid fuels around for aviation for the next 40, 50 years. Why can't we go to batteries? Is right now battery technology is very heavy. You could not fly a plane given the current technology that's out there. The battery required to power a 6-hour flight would be 40 times heavier than the liquid fuel that we use already. So just the technology's not there. Is there research moving toward this? Absolutely. They're looking at solar, they're looking at battery, they're looking at, which kind of go hand in hand, hydrogen fuel cell, which to me is scary when we think about flying an airplane, but we still need that liquid fuel. So if we look at, if you've probably been out at the airport and seen that a lot of aircraft now have winglets, those really do provide great energy savings. Just with a single winglet, 3 to 5% more energy efficient than without. Adding in the split scimitar winglet, so you have one up, one down, adds another 1.7% efficiency over that. So we are making tremendous investments in our fleet itself just to add those additional winglets costs in the millions of dollars per aircraft. We have been able, with our fleet transition, we have a very new fleet that is energy efficient. We have been able to drive down our emissions by just looking at what we fly. In 2008, 2009 timeframe, we made the decision to advance grounding of the MD-80 fleet, which are just basically gas hogs. And so we just said, we're not going to fly those anymore. Let's get more efficient aircraft into our fleet. Also, what we fly, I talked about our approaches into Seattle. If you look at the green line, you can tell that that's a lot less flying distance than those two blue lines. So what we've been able to do through satellite technology on the airplanes is basically reduce our flying by about 88 gallons per flight that use those approaches. I'm going to just skip ahead on a couple of slides because I'm talking too much, apparently. So this is from Boeing and FAA looking at what our savings would be through our Greener Skies program. As I said, saving several gallons per flight, millions of gallons annually saved for our planes that use these approaches. And then we have actually been successful in reducing our emissions by over 33% since 2004 just from our flying. And we are happy to report that the International Council on Clean Transportation has named Alaska the most efficient airline for 5 years in a row now. They're going to kick me off stage soon, and I haven't gotten halfway through my slides. And then I just want to talk about the biofuel that we use. I talked about this, so I don't want to go into it. This is just a picture. A lot of people are like, well, what does biofuel look like? If you use it from used cooking oil, does it look all cloudy? Does it smell like French fries? This is what aviation biofuel looks like. Clean, clear fuel, just like others that you would see. Our vehicle emissions that we talked about, I got asked the questions like, well, what impact does it have? It's not going to significantly change our footprint if we electrify all of our equipment, but we do have a goal to electrify 44% of our ground fleet. That would be higher, but a lot of our operations are in the state of Alaska and in the Arctic. These equipment do not run well on electrical. They actually have to run 24/7 on diesel or else the engines freeze up. Because anybody tell me what that picture is of? If you stare at it really closely. It's actually cups, right? Oops. So this is an artist who actually does artwork based on trash and things that we throw a lot of away. And it just looking at this was years and years ago, where over 1 million disposable cups every 6 hours in the airline industry. Okay? And that was from years ago. On the what looks like wine bottles, for our regional flying, we do serve free beer and wine on those flights, and this is what comes out of it. So Horizon Air actually started the first in-flight recycling program in the country, and that was basically the food and beverage people and the flight attendants felt very compelled and was very important. So our goal is to reduce in-flight waste to landfill by 70% per passenger over a 2010 baseline. They keep adding time for me. And this is what our flight attendants look like now when they collect the recycling. They are actually very excited to do it. We have very loyal passengers who tend to get upset if we don't recycling. We do have to look at safety of flight issues first. Sometimes if there's a lot of turbulence, we are not, or if a flight attendant has to be seated, we're not able to collect. And just by flight attendant-led efforts, we're also starting to do some in-flight collection of coffee grounds for composting as well. And then paper reduction, our goal is to reduce paper 50% by 2020 over 2012 baseline. Our supply chain is very integrated. That picture on the upper portion is all our archived paper that we pay to store. So we're really trying to get those digitized so that we actually don't have to have as much paper. And then we also are looking at, with the cups and the trays that we use for food, to have those to be compostable or made from recyclable materials as well. And I am completely out of time, but I want to talk about, just for a minute, about those are our goals. How do we track the goals? We actually have subject matter experts and goal owners who are required to report out on a monthly basis on their progress towards the goals. Those reports get rolled up and presented to our executive committee on a monthly basis. So we now do have the visibility for our executives to go back and say, well, what's going on and why are we not meeting this goal? Business changes, right? We just acquired another airline that their fleet is different. We're probably, as far as emissions, going to have to change our overall goal as a bigger company. We continue to evaluate those types of things, but we want to be a leader in this industry in driving environmental performance forward. And I think we have a pretty good success rate on doing so.